If you look for opportunities, look at all the millions of businesses that are stuck in the way the business was done in 1980s and 1990s. That alone is $1 billion business to automate. So you don't need to go far. You can just look around, approach all the dry cleaning businesses in your area and say, look, we can make your business so much better. You identify the end goal and then you start working backwards. In order to get there, what are the things that need to happen that will get us to the point where it's all working automatically? The opportunity is so huge that you can just do really, really well.
Mark, let's start with the mindset we need to have when we're automating. I wanted to get into how to think. How do you think like an automator? What's the mindset you need? And how do you think in systems rather than tasks?
Good question. So no two automations are going to be the same. And then for more complex automations, of course, it is important to have a specific mindset that you adopt in order to make it a success. Let's step aside from the automations and think about just application development for those who are familiar with application. Even if you're not, a good practice, and there are different schools of thought, but a good practice that we follow at backendless, because we also do a little bit of custom software development, is you discuss a project with a client. The starting point of the discussion, and of course, some people say you have to write requirements. Yeah, it's all good. But a good starting point is to start thinking about the actual user experience, right? What does the end user, regardless of their role, and there will be multiple roles for an application, end user, customer support, sales, administrators, super users, all those roles are valid. They will still be interacting with the data. So you define what is that user experience for an end user. What do they see on the screen? And it's not necessarily UI. It could be emails that they receive or text messages or Slack. Just all encompassing. What is that user experience? So you start thinking about the end goal first. Imagine the application is there. How will it work? What do the users see? How do you interact? What is the easiest possible way to go from point A to point B or Z to accomplish your tasks? And I believe this similar approach is valid when you think about a problem that you want to automate. You start asking yourself, if it's all working and it's all automated, what in the ideal world it would be like? What do I want this to do? That would be helpful and free up my time. So from that perspective, you identify the end goal and then you start working backwards. In order to get there, what are the things that need to happen that will get us to the point where it's all working automatically? That approach frees you up from putting any constraints that come with tooling and systems and frameworks. You really just start breaking down the problem into smaller tasks. And that is a general engineering approach that I believe is universal, because in engineering, specifically in programming and in computer science, you have to take a problem and start breaking it down into smaller problems. And then you iteratively, recursively continue doing this until you cannot break it down anymore. And at that point, you have the individual steps all interconnected with all of the decisions, with all of the logic and branches in that process that puts it all together and gets you from point A, where you start, to point Z, where you want to be. Exactly the same thing is valid with automations. Now, modern automations, and we're thinking, circa 2025 now, right? Or even in the course of the next 5-10 years, which will probably be like drastically different in 10 years where it is now, versus automations that existed in the late 90s, early 2000s. Okay. It's still possible to approach problems today like you would in 2003, where you say, okay, right now humans log in, get the email, open up an attachment, take this data, put it into some other system. You're essentially repeating the process that humans do in an automated manner. 100% valid. There are tools that will provide you support to do that. But I believe that it's going to be important in the modern world to approach automation from the perspective of not replicating exactly the steps that are being done by humans, but really delegating to the software to let the software make the decisions for you. And that is a very, very different approach where you really delegate rather than replicate the process.
Can you give an example? Maybe something simple like an inbox sort of automation or email automation.
Sure. But whenever you put AI in the middle, it becomes very easy to think about it. Because let's say that let's take a very specific problem of categorizing or classifying email message. For AI, it will be a very trivial task to look at a text and say, is it a sales inquiry? Is it a support inquiry? Is it an email with an invoice? Is it praise for an employee that did an outstanding job? AI can definitely decipher through all the text, regardless of the language that it's written in, and perhaps by looking at the attachments and the contents that's in them, to understand what it is, right? You don't really have to train AI because it's already a language model. So if you provide language, it will do a great job. So from that perspective, you don't even have to write out business rules. You just say, look, here's an email. Tell me what's in it. And then, depending on what's in it, draft a response. Or if you believe that it's something that needs to be reviewed or someone needs to be alerted, tell me, is it going to be an alert to a finance department, engineering, operations, customer support, so it can be channeled to the right queue, and then create a summary of the tasks that people in that department need to be aware of associated with that specific email. So we're kind of just blowing this problem up, but it is all valid, right? If you start implementing this thing over and over and over again, you could actually free up a lot of time for a lot of people, because those are the things that are happening today anyway.
So anytime you're classifying information, essentially, let AI decide. This is what it sounds like almost. Like anytime you have to decide, oh, is this type of information, this type of information, or this type of information, instead of manually reviewing and making that analysis yourself, bring AI into the mix and
Yeah,
then let it analyze and decide and
sure,
cut yourself out of the
sure.
equation.
Think about all the contact us forms that are present on the websites, probably hundreds of millions of them. And they all go to more than likely to info at whateveryourcompany.com. So at every single company, there is going to be someone who receives those emails and needs to understand, is it a complaint? Is it a support inquiry? Is it a sales inquiry? Is it spam? There's probably going to be 99% of that, unless you have captured that hopefully is working. So that translates to a lot of hours that are being spent by humans across the board. And that would be a very simple problem to automate, at least just to create this intelligent router that will filter out junk, filter out all the noise, determine what the signal is, and then route that signal to the appropriate channel. At the very minimum, you could start elaborating and enhancing this case to make it more intelligent. I wouldn't say effortlessly, but with minimal effort. If you are an automator, you start working with the client, and there is this person who is responsible for processing those emails. Let's call him, manager of info at. And you ask them, tell me, what do you do? In most cases, you will not get a straight answer or an algorithm that they follow. You will not. It's kind of funny. I was talking to a client, and we're talking about automating some of the processes in finance. And then the use case that is being discussed is rather simple. They receive a bunch of invoices every single month from all kinds of vendors, and they open up their invoice, they look at it, and just put the data into an ERP system. And I say, can you describe what you think would be the ideal use case if everything is just working automatically? So a guy in finance says, ideally, I would like to have an API, and all of the vendors would just integrate with our API, and they just submit the data through the API, which technically is a viable solution. It's definitely possible to achieve. You publish an API, but let's say you have 100 vendors. It means you will be asking 100 different companies to start integrating with your API, right? How feasible is that? Versus you just say, my dear vendors, here's an email address that you send your invoices to, and we just take care of all the processing of invoices on our side. The end result is exactly the same. In fact, you will have more control than yours say, because you can, well, with APIs, you can still, you control the API, you can start tweaking it, but it's going to be more of a technical solution rather than creating a business level automation that knows how to process your invoices.
Hmm.
So the perspective of the people that you're talking to will be different. And as a result, the mindset that you have as an automator, I believe, is going to be quite different than the mindset of a programmer that is assigned to implement certain process. Programmer will think in a very algorithmic, step-by-step manner. This is not meant to say that an automation is a step by, it's not a step-by-step process. It is. However, with automation, it is important that you give more room for creativity and decision making to the automation itself.
What questions do you need to ask? Like, what's the information that you need before you can start automating anything? Because in my case, and in most things in my life, I have an idea of what I want to do. I start
Mm-hmm.
trying to do it, and then I'm like, shit, I don't know what I don't have this vital piece of information. Now I have to go and email this person and spend another week waiting for correspondence to be able to start this task. And then I realize, oh, wait, I don't have this piece of information either. So, what sort of framework do you have for information you need to get started on something and not trip and get stuck on a bunch of roadblocks?
Sure. So more complex automations will have multiple stakeholders. You will have people representing different perspectives and points of view, and they all will have their own interests and requirements. So whenever you end up in a situation where you have multiple stakeholders, you need to drop down to the level of playing field where everyone can basically get synchronized and really understand that we're all on the same page. Therefore, technology speak, tooling goes out of the window. Texts become inefficient and perhaps subject to the interpretation, right? So, a good old approach of getting a shared whiteboard and drawing up a flow chart, I noticed works every single time. Okay, because in the business world, regardless whether you have people with computer science degree or management degrees, everyone took a class in flow charting at school, and it's very easy to understand, right? Everyone knows how to represent conditions and branching and decision making and actions and so on. So using flowchart as the mechanism to synchronize across multiple stakeholders works great every single time, because everyone's like, yes, we understand, that's what the flow is, that's what happens. Now, it becomes an essential artifact in the subsequent step of actually implementing your workflow. And then, in addition to that, many automation tools, including FlowRunner, they kind of follow this graphical approach where you automate by creating something that looks like a flowchart. So if you have that artifact that you just replicate from the implementation perspective, it works out great.
And what are the ways to think about each piece of your flowchart? Because you might put a really big task on there that is actually a bunch of smaller things,
Mm-hmm.
not realizing that it's not
Sure.
one thing. How do
Right.
you break down into what chunk sizes do you see are the most efficient when flowcharting and thinking through the process?
Going back to what I said, breaking down a larger problem into smaller tasks. So this breakdown is essential. Do you need to chart every single little detail? Probably not. What works for us is asking questions, what are the business rules? Or just start, drilling down into individual elements of data. Like, for example, the same problem that I described of automated processing of invoices. One of the things that came up is, and everybody, well, a lot of people know that when you send an invoice, there is a reference to a purchase order. So then the question is, does the purchase order need to be validated? What if there is no purchase order in the invoice? Do we send back an email to the vendor saying your invoice is invalid, there is no purchase order? Or do we generate a purchase order on demand? And in this case, do we generate a purchase order every single time, or there is an approval step where there is an invoice? Perhaps it is a valid invoice, they just don't have a purchase order. So a person in charge needs to say approve, and an invoice and a purchase order is generated. So a simple fact that there is a purchase order or one could be missing can be exploded into some additional steps. And this is in reverse to what you ask. It's like you basically say, here's a block. Does it need to be what I'm saying is that there is a block, but it may just be exploded into multiple blocks. And it could go both ways because someone could draw up this flowchart and say, here's a block, and it says extract data from an invoice, and the next block save it to ERP system, and then you start expanding it into others. So I believe the process of breaking things down needs to continue until everyone says this is the extent of all the business rules that we have in place.
What are some common pitfalls then to watch out for when implementing an automation? Is there anything that is often overlooked that might save a lot of time if you knew from the start?
Number one thing that comes to mind is handling of errors,
Errors. Okay.
because they will happen.
How do you manage those?
You just have to add error handling logic. You just have to assume that some things will fail, and they could fail for reasons that are controllable, right? Like for instance, missing data. Let's continue on the same invoice processing. Data is missing, right? They sent an invoice, the totals are not there, or purchase order is not there. That's an error condition. Like if one is required, or the ones that are not controlled is you try to go to email and mail server is down, so you have to retry, right? Or you send an email for approval and it bounces back for whatever reason. Malformed email address sitting somewhere in the system. So assuming that things will go wrong is very, very important. Did you know that with Netflix developed a whole framework for their own system where it just basically randomly, I don't know, randomly or with some kind of algorithm that just goes out and brings things down intentionally. So there is a process in place that fixes it automatically. And that's how they raise reliability of their service. And that enforces the culture for developers to basically build a system where you expect a failure.
Right. If you don't have any technical background and you're trying to start automating, how do you think about error handling and how do you set things up so that you catch the errors and
Sure.
they're not remaining fundamentally mysterious?
This is one of the things that choosing the right tool will either make or break your automation. I'm not intimately familiar with how it is done in Zapier or Make or other systems, but with FlowRunner, the way it is done is that everything are blocks. There are blocks for triggers, blocks for actions, blocks for conditions. So it's a fairly standard flow chart like experience to create an automation. Some blocks are AI powered, so you can just treat it as a black box that you throw data in and it just makes a decision for you. Specifically with error handling, there is a special block that is called error handler. So what you can do is you add this block, and you could have specific error handlers. Let's say if you were communicating with database and something goes wrong, you can connect your block that is responsible for communicating with the database with error handler. So if there is an error, it will just the control of the flow will go to error handler. And that's where you can just add some additional steps for dealing with an error. If you want to have generic error handler, you can just have one error handler and all the blocks will just go to that error handler. So no matter where error happens, it's going to be handled, and and inside of that error handler, you can say, "Oh, where did the error happen?" And it will say that specific place in your automation. I would say that specifically with dealing with errors, it would need to be partially responsibility of the tool to provide a framework and an infrastructure for you to be able to deal with errors. But for an automator, if you follow the mindset that everything may result in an error, it will make your automation better.
Make it idiot proof, basically.
Pretty much.
Does AI fit into this? Can you use AI for error handling, maybe, or fixing errors? Is that possible?
It's definitely possible. It's definitely possible, especially if error has a lot of additional context around it. AI is pretty good in terms of diagnosing and providing an insight as to what has happened. Error handling, once you start adding error handling, the complexity of your flows may increase exponentially. Because if everything goes well, it could be a fairly, smooth flow, couple of branches, some decisions. But once things kind of go off rails, there could be so many different things that have gone wrong. And if you start handling all of them in order to make a perfect automation, yes, you will just have like an explosion of additional branches. How can AI fit in this? Well, if you delegate to AI to ask, what would be the best course of action, and it just comes back and saying do this, then it could simplify your automation and make it more intelligent. Like it could say retry, right? And then you just loop back into where you started. Or it could say, send an email to the admin, report that there was a problem, because it could be something that your flow is not handling quite well or is not doing something quite right. So there's definitely, I think there is room for AI in terms of error handling.
What does it look like when you're deciding where to automate? So, say you have a big problem in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
What does your decision process look like when you're thinking this part should be automated, or maybe this part isn't, or maybe I need to break it down in this way? Like, what's the big framework you use when deciding on how to tackle a problem? If it's maybe someone who's given you very vague outcomes that they want.
Let's start with small things, right? Like if you notice that for whatever task that you have at hand, that you keep doing the same thing every day, once a week, whatever, and it's a very specific set of steps that you execute, that's definitely a candidate for automation. For example, if you use Gmail doesn't have folders, they have tags. So if you notice that you constantly categorize emails by throwing emails of certain kind, they just go to a specific tag, so they're not polluting your inbox, that's a great candidate for automation, where you basically say, create a rule, like if an email is from that address or has these words in the subject, move out of the archive it and assign to that tag. So it just helps you to keep your inbox cleaner. That's the most primitive automation that would be super helpful for a lot of people. I use it all the time. And that is small and simple and powerful. Similar principle can be applied to when you're creating automations for a business process. Sometimes just observing a team at work and just seeing or asking, how they do certain things would produce very powerful results. I noticed that asking non-technical users to describe how they do certain things, so in order to automate them, will not provide results that you expect. Asking them how they do certain things, step aside from the automation, just understand the process that they follow, for you will give you a great insight.
This is reminding me a lot of the UX process. If you have a product you're designing, maybe you're redesigning. In my case, I was redesigning a supply chain solution, and it was originally for food, but it was supposed to be applied to broader industries with much more functionality. You can't just sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to redesign this one page just to look nicer and this one page to look nicer. You have to sit there and go, okay, what's the bigger goal here? You want to make this process more efficient, and who's using it? And then say, okay, well, if I'm the product engineer, I don't care about the bill of lading and the whole logistics department. I care about whatever bill of materials and the product design aspect. So I'm gonna omit some of the functionality for them to simplify their interface, because
Mm-hmm.
their experience doesn't need all that clutter. And overall, like in UX work in general, you're really trying to, I guess, uncover the overarching goals of the people, what specific, and part of that is what specific tasks they perform, but it's why they perform those tasks. So I think I'm coming to the conclusion that automation is really just UX, but for life almost. Like it's like you're just making everything easier.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But look, day in, day out, we spend time on tasks, even recreationally. Like if you go, fishing, it's a task. Prepare your fishing gear, go get bait, park your car, get on the ramp. Like you can basically prescribe single step and have a very smart, intelligent robot do that for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or in the business process, everything can be prescribed as a set of steps, which means that if we fast forward far into the future, even the creative part can be done by computers. Because I think at one point with AGI, some of the creative tasks can be shifted to computers, to systems. So it is it is UX for everyday tasks in business or on the personal side. But at this point, we choose to automate those tasks that we have the least amount of fun with,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
Because, and as time will go on, we will automate everything that we just don't like doing. And then we will be doing things that we like doing, and we're going to get bored with that, with those. Then we'll shift them to AI and automations, and there will be even fewer tests that we like. And I think that that will start trimming down things that are left.
I'm just thinking, what's the ultimate end point of this look like? If you get if you keep automating and you find something new to do and then you get bored, what's really, I mean,
Well, there could be multiple outcomes. One of them is just machines take over, and then Matrix happens,
yeah,
right? And we're just fighting machines for our independence, which is kind of far fetched, but who knows?
could happen.
Right.
It's a non-zero possibility.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Somewhere in that universe, there is a Terminator scenario where, we figure out how to do time travel, send someone back just to, make sure that they get Sam Altman and others to kind of stop all the AI projects. I think the roots are where we are now. But in other possibilities, it's just everyone just decides what are the things that they want to do on any given day. I think the biggest fear is that we will just get to the point where humans will get so lazy and unproductive, where we'll just become an extinct species. 30 years ago, it would be hard to imagine the world as it is now,
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah.
right?
It's moved so fast in the past year, imagine in 30.
Yeah. Yeah, like the world that existed before smartphones and then after smartphones are two completely different worlds. Now, to the same extent, or even greater, we can compare the world before AI and with AI.
Do you think AI is like the internet or like
I think it's
electricity?
even bigger. I think it's even bigger. I remember my fascination where I could just go and Google anything, and with practically no effort, you could find anything. Of course, over time, there is just as many ads on the first page as there is content, and it's questionable if that content is relevant or not. With AI, it's effortless to get an answer. Now, let's put AI into everything and anything, from light bulbs to cars. Life will just become completely different. So the set of problems that we as humans will have once AI perforated and proliferated through our lives entirely, it is very hard to imagine what set of problems we as humans will have at that point. But who's to say that in 5 years there's not going to be an LLM sitting on every single smartphone, your personal LLM that knows everything about you, and before you open your mouth it's going to say you're about to say something stupid, shut up, right?
I need one of those.
just, just because it knows that, right, you didn't have a good sleep, your heart rate right now is not where it's due, you didn't have enough protein for breakfast or carbohydrates, and
Yeah.
your mental state is where you just had a breakup with someone. I think the current trend is that we will start relying more and more on AI. It will be composing our email messages and making phone calls for us and doing a lot of things that we do right now. So it will definitely free up us from the tasks that people do not enjoy. That goes without saying. But
Yeah.
in a way that will create, eventually, will create a sort of group or multiple groups where one relies on AI,
Yeah.
and they're like, those people are intertwined with technology and AI. And then there will be a group that will consider themselves pure, right? Like human purists, like we
Hmm.
are authentic humans. We don't do anything with technology. We speak our own
Amish,
words.
basically.
Yes, it's like, next gen Amish. Right, exactly. Like, when you
Mm-hmm.
talk to me, I am 100% authentic human. And that's going
Mm.
to be an element of pride. I do not rule it out. I think it's quite possible,
I think
especially,
that's entirely possible.
yeah.
So right now, with how fast everything's changing, the uncertainty right now is breeding so many future successful tech entrepreneurs just because they have the willingness to learn a few tools. How do you stay on top of it, and how would you recommend someone gets ahead and really capitalizes on the technology we have.
Just learn AI. It doesn't matter whether it's Gemini, whether it's OpenAI, DeepSeek, whatever. Just learn AI. Think about how AI can make lives better and easier. I watched a video, it was a TikTok by Mark Cuban, where he was talking about when he was getting started, right? And his thing was that whenever something new would come up, his observation was that older people would not understand whatever that new technology was, and he was going after it, making it accessible, making it, figuring out a way to use it and sell it to older people, essentially, right? Because you're staying ahead of the massive population that is going to be behind. I think last time we spoke, you said that there are people who are still afraid to kind of try ChatGPT. I'm sure there are a lot of those. So if younger people, for them, it's so much more natural to just grasp it and look at the set of problems that are being solved and see how that new technology can be applied to solve those problems and sell it to those who do not get it with a value added benefit. There's just tremendous amount of opportunities there for younger generations.
Yeah, even the way that boomer businesses are being sold now more and more because they want to retire and they have no one to
Sure.
give it to. If you,
Exactly.
as a young person, buy up that business and automate all the processes that were very outdated, you suddenly turn around the profit and you have super low overhead, you're set.
If you are highly motivated, visionary, it's one of course there is a possibility where you start thinking about like new startup and forward thinking technology and some breakthroughs and whatnot. But at the same time, if you look for opportunities, look at all the millions of businesses that are stuck in the way the business was done in 1980s and 1990s. Right? Like look at all the roofing businesses, small daycares, chiropractors, whatever, businesses that still do living. They're not, generating millions, but there are a lot of businesses. And they are doing things old way. I'm pretty sure in the majority of medical clinics, they just, get a bunch of paperwork and they have a lady that just kind of going through and sends emails to insurance companies just to do the billing. That alone is probably, I don't know, $1 billion business to automate. So you don't need to go far. You can just look around, approach all the dry cleaning businesses in your area and say, look, we can make your business so much better.
It's just arbitrage, I guess, the tools that exist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to do it from scratch.
Exactly. Once you have established good understanding of what this technology is about, how to harness it to do things for humans from the automation perspective, right? There is a lot. The opportunity is so huge that you can just do really, really well. Like if I were to start a consulting business, all I would do is I would figure out how to do automations, whatever the tool. Of course, I would pick FlowRunner, and I would just start approaching local businesses in the area. Just walk in and say, look, I can help you save thousands of dollars every single month. You implement this automation once. Most of those for this type of businesses are going to be cookie cutters. So you implement it once, you figure out the business rules that a dry cleaner or roofing company follows, and just start applying it everywhere.
So would you just go in and say, what processes do you hate doing? Or what's the, I guess, question you would lead with if you were to go
I would
in?
say, do you have a person who is responsible for billing? How do you do invoicing? Do you have any vendors that you work with? How do you process their invoices? How do you work with your suppliers?
I see. Lead with problems that already have solutions instead of
Right.
asking them, what problems do you have? People
Yeah.
will freeze.
They
They don't know what
whatever
problems they
problems
have.
that they have, they are either solve those problems or in the process of solving them. So asking what problems do you have, like, no, everything's good. We're running,
Yeah.
lights are on. But if you say, look, if I can help you save thousands of dollars every month, of course, they will listen.
So it's a matter of figuring out what are the most common problems that these types of businesses have, learning what common solutions you can build for those, and then just going and leading with those.
And then if you don't want to guess what problems they have, just ask ChatGPT. What do you think are the productivity problems, especially with humans performing routine tasks by hand manually? I'm sure it will come up with a bunch of ideas.
Say you go and build this automation for them, right? How do you hand it off? Like, what's that process? Do you just deploy or?
You come in and you say, look, this thing can help you save thousands of dollars. If you would like to see it work, give me an opportunity. All right. Implement something for free, foot in the door. They see it working. I'm sure you'll get more business.
And then what about maintenance? Would there be like a monthly maintenance type of
something,
thing?
yeah.
Or
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's still going to be cheaper than having a full-time employee.
Mm-hmm. So leveraging the cost of the alternative.
Right. If you're talking to a business owner who is not technical, most of them are not going to be technical. Otherwise, they will already have something. You just go in and you say, look, I'm here to offer a virtual employee that will work for you 24/7. You do not need to pay overtime. And that virtual employee can do infinite amount of work for one fixed monthly fee. That's an offer that is hard to refuse.
Last question then. Do you have Stripe integration for FlowRunner?
Of course.
If you want to build this product, you want to sell it to them, can you just collect payment? You set it up and there you go.
Absolutely.
So then that leaves no excuses.
Yeah, you can create an automation. You can just sell it as an affiliate, let's say for FlowRunner. You can publish it into our marketplace for a fee. Let everybody else buy it, follow your instructions, or hire you to do the customizations. We get our commission. You get the rest of the payment for whatever it's sold. Now, that is a money-making machine. We talked about money-making machines last time where, hey, here's a virtual sales agent. It will make you millions. It reminds me of that episode with SpongeBob when he was selling chocolate and saying, you will live forever. Remember that one? I thought that was the funniest one. All of them are funny.
That one is incredible.
When he knocks on the door and that old fish, it's like, who is that? And he's like, I'm selling chocolate and you will live forever. And, daughter or whatever was like, no, not that value proposition.
And then the shriveled up mom is there. Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah, that was super funny. Right. So out of all the money-making machines, I think creating flows that actually solve smaller problems with a big impact for businesses that are not, Google or Meta, but just kind of mom and pop shops.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can make a really good living with that from that.
Yeah. And it's not easy enough for them to do it themselves, which is what gives you the leverage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for teaching us a little bit more about how to make a money-making machine and how to make our lives easier.
My pleasure. It's always fun.